Welcome, everybody, and well done for doing it to make it with us on a fairly sunny late afternoon. This is our last talk of the academic year. That's not the last one. We will meet again in September, and it will be a hybrid event on campus. But we will take a break next month, because I'm sure that next month there will be more people who won't be able to resist the beach. So we will take a break in August. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce today a talk on a topic that has been in high demand. Because people have been asking lots of questions about training, public service interpreter training. So we've decided to go with public demand and to organize a session on training for public service interpreting. But before we start, we have a disclaimer. We will not, in this seminar, answer any question about specific training. We won't answer questions about training taking place in a specific place. We will just share tips of what you should look for if you're looking for good public service interpreter training courses. So don't try to ask specific questions, because they will be boycotted. So just general questions. We've got quite a few things going on today. So we will first have a presentation by Yvonne Fowler about the principle of training courses. And then we will have some shared experience by Reka, who has gathered some testimonies from people who trained at public service interpreter. So that will be the first part of our time together. And we hope to have plenty of time for questions in the second half of the seminar. So without further ado, I will hand over to Yvonne, who will be taking the first part of the session. Over to you, Yvonne.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and I do hope that everybody can hear me clearly. If you can't, then Emmanuel will let me know by putting her thumbs down. Lovely to see everybody on this sunny evening, and in response to many inquiries about training courses and requests for this subject to be discussed in the Aston Interpreter Network, I'm going to talk as briefly as I can about aspects of training courses in general, together with problems about different levels of qualifications. And I'm going to start by discussing some confusing terminology which is prevalent in the world of course providers. And then I'll go on to outline what the lay public and the service providers think interpreters do. And then after that, I'm going to discuss, again briefly, because I really want to hear what you think about this, some essential elements of training courses based on internationally accepted standards and research by academic practitioners in public service interpreting, together with obviously my own 30 years or so of experience of designing and delivering training courses for public service interpreters. And then when I've finished, Reka will talk about her own training course and how she put that training into action. And as I said, we're aiming to leave as much time as possible for your comments and a discussion of your own experiences, because that's really what it's all about. So first of all, I'm going to do a bit of clarifying a bit of very confusing terminology. Now, there are a number of course providers and qualifications that make a distinction between community interpreting and public service interpreting. So, for example, a level 3 qualification in something called community interpreting is supposed to enable you to work in the NHS, the mental health services, social services, education, local government. And those course providers call this interpreting within the community. And then a qualification at level 6, like the Diploma in Public Service Interpreting, according to some course providers, is supposed to enable you to work in the so-called public services, the police, the courts, the prisons, the Home Office, quasi-legal and legal settings. Those course providers claim that interpreting in these sectors is called public service interpreting. Now, obviously, the implication of that is that legal settings are more difficult and challenging than medical, social work, mental health settings, or education. However, there is no inherent difference in complexity or level of challenge between one setting or another when it comes to public service interpreting. Interpreting is interpreting. Each setting has its own specific challenges, and it's misleading to assume that straightforward procedures are accompanied by straightforward language and that complex procedures are accompanied by complex language, because institutional language level is not the only element to consider when you're assessing complexity in interpreting. Secondly, I'd like to clear up as to why the United Kingdom adopted the term public service interpreting and rejected the term community interpreting, and it was to distinguish it from interpreting for the European community, as it was called then. And people were getting mixed up, and it was causing confusion. So Anne Corsellis, who some of you may have heard of, who encouraged the rejection of the term community interpreting because, as I said, it was causing confusion. And the rest of the world, particularly the English-speaking world, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, and then after them, most European countries have nearly always called what we call public service interpreting community interpreting. So it has nothing whatever to do with levels of complexity. It is exactly the same thing. Community interpreting is public service interpreting, and public service interpreting is community interpreting. So maybe we can talk about that later in question time. Secondly, there's a myth about interpreting itself, and I'm sure that you are subject to this myth yourself. It's very enduring myth, which is prevalent amongst the lay public and service providers, that all you need to be an interpreter is to be able to speak 2 languages. Academic researchers and interpreters worldwide over a period of the last, I would say, 3 decades have exploded that myth, which has been shown to be extremely damaging and incorrect. Rather, bilingualism, being able to speak 2 languages well, is a prerequisite for acceptance on a professional training course. I can recall so many times when interpreters have said to me, "Oh, Yvonne, I think I'm a really careful interpreter. I'm really careful. I interpret everything word for word." But of course, as you all know very well, the interpreter is not a machine, and interpreting is nothing to do with words. It is to do with meanings, and it's far, far more complex than people give you credit for. So, if there's no difference between community interpreting and public service interpreting, which there isn't, let's see what a public service interpreting program, training program, should look like. It should be evidence-based, and it should be incorporate the results of international research. And if Emmanuelle could please show us the first slide. She's got a really, really useful diagram. At least I find it very useful. Hale, who's an Australian academic interpreter, maintains that based on research, there are 3 kinds of interpreting. And starting at the bottom, you would, interpreting, people who think that interpreting is just interpreting words and do it at a literal level. is the lowest level, and we all know that you can't do that. Literal interpreting just wouldn't make sense. Then we go up a level to the second level, which she calls the sentence level, and the product would be a semantic rendition. And that she maintains most people are interpreting at sentence level when they should be, and let's go one level up, interpreting at discourse level. And interpreting at discourse level involves some grounding, some studying of the scientific study of how language works. And she calls this a top-down approach, and word level and sentence level a bottom-up approach. So obviously you're going to be thinking, well, Yvonne, tell me, what are the essential elements of a public service interpreting course, training course, based on international research evidence? So please, the next slide, please, Emmanuel, thank you. The first one, I've divided it up into 8 categories, but they are not exhaustive because of constraints of time. So I'm having to squash them into a very, very short period of time. So the first thing on Sandra Hale's and many other people's researchers' list is professional issues. And I'm going to put this, I've always put the statement of intent first and establishing linguistic rapport first, because I think they are incredibly important insurance policy before you even start your interaction. Then following on from that, the difference between interpreting and advocacy, no, they're not the same. Direct versus indirect speech, they're not the same, and why you have to use direct speech. Intervention management, the difference between translation and interpreting, ethical dilemmas, codes of conduct, how you prepare for an assignment, and keeping a reflexive diary. And I can say more about those elements, particularly the statement of intent and keeping a reflexive diary, later. So perhaps we can go on to the next slide, Emmanuel. Skills development. I do a lot of language consolidation exercises with my students, with my trainees, and I expect them to do a lot of those exercises by themselves at home. You need a short course in terminology, otherwise you won't know how to collect terms, you won't know how to gloss terms, you won't know the difference between language for everyday purposes and language for specific purposes, and you've got to be able to recognise a term when you see it. The use of concordances, incredibly useful. I can say more about what concordances are later if that's what you're interested in. Customised note-taking for interpreters, it has to be done in a special way. Developing consecutive and simultaneous skills, memory skills, listening skills, which are over and above the normal memory skills and listening skills that you need for everyday interaction. So that's skills development. The next one, please, thank you very much. You do need to have some knowledge of forensic linguistics and pragmatics. It's very, very important. Forensic linguistics means studying language in order to improve the delivery of justice, and studying research about interpreting mistakes and errors and the consequences of them, or the consequences of interpreting using semantic or literal level. The importance of speech styles and hesitations and register, and the impact of the interpreter. And then pragmatics is also a very, very important part of a training course. Study of language and meaning in a particular context, a particular institutional context. And as Sandra Hale says, she says that pragmatics is about minimizing the differences between the original speech, original utterance, and the interpreted version by matching the force of the original in order to produce the same intended effect on the hearer. So we'll go on to the next slide. Again, I'm happy to answer questions about that in the last half hour of the session. The institutional context, just because there are only 4 bullet points here, doesn't mean to say there's less content. You have to study and understand the goals of the institution. Is it an adversarial institution like the police or the courts, or is it a non-adversarial situation like a medical consultation or a hospital? You have to understand institutional procedures of the particular institution that you're studying. You have to understand the language of that institution, and we'd have to do unscripted role plays with actual, real, authentic service providers. So that's the institutional context. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. Advanced language skills development. So it obviously interpreting performance from English into the other language and vice versa in both modes of interpreting. Learning to sight translate, and in my view, it is an underestimated task in terms of complexity. It is quite a difficult thing to learn to do. And again, if you want me to say something about that, I can. And obviously, interpreters don't just interpret, as you very well know. Sometimes they have to translate documents, and that is a whole different skill. So on to the next one, please, Emmanuel. Thank you. Right, this is absolutely vital. Work experience. So, for example, in the Diploma in Public Service Interpreting course that I have done, we arranged filmed training sessions at the Police Training College with real police officers acting out authentic role plays in their video link suite. And perhaps Rekha would like to say something about that, because she was there for those training sessions. And plus, when we did the legal option, we attended filmed training sessions in the magistrates' courts for 4 whole Saturdays at 20 hours in a fully staffed courtroom with real magistrates, real court clerks, real criminal advocates, and real Crown prosecutors acting out role plays based on real authentic cases. And I also got trainees to go into the courtroom by themselves in their own spare time and do observation and provide feedback. Shadowing experienced interpreters is very important. Acting out role plays with medical staff, health visitors, nurses, and all the people in the institution that you're working with. And of course, the great thing is that training works both ways, because not only do the trainees get trained, but the service providers get trained too. So it's 2 for 1 there. The next slide, please, Emmanuel. Peer observation, very, very important skill to acquire. You don't want to upset other students as you give them feedback, so you have to learn how to observe them as they interpret in role plays and give and receive positive feedback on their performance, both language-specific feedback and also non-language specific feedback. You have to develop, this feeds into keeping a reflexive diary, so you have to develop your own reflexivity and keep a diary and look back at how you were at the beginning, how you were in the middle, and how you were at the end. And of course, this all helps you to make action plans for improvement, which is very important. And then the last one, please, Emmanuel, the last category is obviously examination preparation. If you're going to take an exam, it's all very well having done all these wonderful role plays and all these wonderful interactions in court and everything. You've got to be prepared for the format of the exam. And that involves preparation for all the tasks required for the DPSI, looking and practicing with past examination papers, understanding how the assessment criteria apply to you, lots and lots of mock examination practice, and confidence building exercises, which I can say a bit more about if you want me to, so that you don't get too nervous on the day of the exam. So it's important to realise, in the words of Sandra Hale, and if we could have the next slide, please, Emmanuel. no course can possibly claim to cover all the areas necessary to train students adequately for the complex task of community interpreting. And this is inevitably true. Training courses suffer from the following deficiencies, really. They are too short, and that applies just as much to my courses as it does to anybody else's. There is only courses are too short, and that is partly to do with funding issues. They're very expensive to run. Some course providers don't have enough grounding in linguistics, and some courses don't provide any work experience. So you're going to say to me, I'm sure you're thinking, well, what do I do then, Yvonne? So what can I do to select the right training course? So if I could have the next slide, please, Emmanuel. I'm nearly finished. You have got to train yourself. The shorter your course, the longer you will have to spend in training yourself to fill in the gaps. You have to attend conferences, and yes, that's expensive. You can sign up for online courses. Some of them are free. The Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics and the Aston Centre for Applied Linguistics do free talks online quite frequently, and you're more than welcome to join in those. And you need, obviously, what is free once you've bought the book, is to read and read as much as possible. And basically, you've just got to train yourself and start with this wonderful book, Community Interpreting by Sandra Hale, this great Australian researcher. Buy it, read it cover to cover, and also another book, which is An Introduction to Pragmatics by Peter Grundy, 1995, that one is. Edward Arnold. Buy it, enjoy it. It's quite an enjoyable read and a good introduction to pragmatics. So I've finished now, and I'm very happy to answer questions and receive comments about what I said. And I'm going to hand over now to Rekha. And we're doing quite well in terms of time, I think. So over to you, Rekha.
Thank you, Yvonne, for your insight. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And thank you, Emmanuel, for organizing today's session. The course that I did with Yvonne, I did 2 DPSI courses consecutively in 2003 and then in 2004. The first was a law, French, and the second one was health, also for French. When I did the first course, and I have to thank my colleague Paul Smith for telling me about Yvonne's courses, they were her DPSI course at the time, and I think still could be, was said to be, if not the best, one of the best in the country. And in order to get onto that course, you couldn't just apply. You applied, and then you underwent a very rigorous selection assessment to get onto Yvonne's DPSI course in law. And there were written papers, which included translating into English and into the other language, as well as a freestyle essay on a particular topic, again in the language of that you were going to study, and also in English, as well as an interpreting element where you had an interpreting test with an examiner and an interlocutor. And this course was a combination of theory and practice, and included discussions with police officers of West Midlands Police, and at what was known at the time as Tally Ho. It's the West Midlands Police Training Centre. Not only did we have discussions, and as Yvonne herself said, we had role plays based on real life scenarios with those officers. I've still got that booklet, the book that contains those real life scenarios. That was one set of scenarios, practical aspect that we did. We also had discussions in Birmingham Magistrates Court with magistrates, real life solicitors, both from the prosecution and defense, legal advisors, ushers, And as with the police, we also did role plays based on real life scenarios. So all of these scenarios and discussions, both in court and with the police, were done over several weeks, over several sessions. And as Yvonne said, the role plays were video recorded with our permission. This is in the days before GDPR. And at the end of each session, each interpreter got a copy to monitor and review their performance in terms of how well they did the interpreter's introduction and use of consecutive and simultaneous modes. And also during those sessions, at the end of the role plays, we were given feedback, not only by our peers, not only by the tutor, that is to say Yvonne, but the other professionals present, about what the expectations were or what we could improve on and things like that. May we have the next slide, please, Emmanuel? Excuse me. We also had invaluable insight and input from a solicitor advocate, Malcolm Fowler. I know he's there today, and professionals from organizations such as the Probation Service and CAFCAS, amongst others. We had language lab training. We had self-recording in one's own time. And this training was for elements such as complete listening, complete reading, lagging, reformulating, and summarizing, to name a few of the elements that we were being trained to do. We were also taught about the importance of the interpreter's introduction or statement of intent. We were also taught how to intervene in both languages and how to manage such interventions. We were given observation sheets, and these observation sheets contained pointers on what to look for in order for us to give constructive feedback, not only to our peers during role plays, but we were also encouraged to go to court, magistrates and Crown Court, to observe real cases and note down snippets of information, note down how the interpreters were, doing their job. We didn't have to just go and find out if any case was interpreter mediated. It was just to observe a real case to see how the various actors in a courtroom, how they performed their roles, their job, from the bench, from the solicitor side, defense and prosecuting, even how the defendants or victims or witnesses presented in court. We are also taught how to create and maintain glossaries and looking at how community or public service interpreting was being done in other countries, in Europe, in Australia, Canada, and USA, as Yvonne has mentioned. All of this was the grounding for us, on how to do our job as public service interpreters. And another useful element, and I think Yvonne did that on it, was note-taking. The use of notebooks during an assignment, a very crucial aspect. If you don't have a notebook, any scrappy piece of paper will do. I've used napkins, I've even used the palm of my hand, and I've used post-it notes when I've been caught short and asked to interpret at the last minute. The next slide, please, Emmanuel. So, Yvonne's course, we were not just assessed for written and sight translation, but also for interpreting, both consecutive and especially simultaneous. And as she said, we were also encouraged to do self-reflection about our work. So her course prepared us very thoroughly for the exam. And overall, it gave us a thorough grounding for terminology purposes, for learning court etiquette, for learning the procedures in various settings, how to be a professional interpreter, and to know what is expected of an interpreter, with the bonus of preparing us for real-life situations from the real-life scenarios that we practiced and for which we got feedback from our peers and from other professionals. Yvonne's course remains, it was and remains a perfect example of a holistic and in-depth approach on studying and working in public services. I would like notes for you to read feedback from 4 colleagues who are now friends of mine, 4 co-students of mine at the time, their feedback. So can we have, please, Emmanuel, the first slide, which is from Sonia. I want you to read them, especially the last one, which is the longest, but says a lot.
Priceless.
The next one, please, Emmanuel. The third one. And the final one. It's a bit, how shall I put it? There you go. Can you all see it, I hope? I did sort of cut something Iftikhar had written right at the beginning of his very fantastic and lengthy message. He felt he was back at school. No offense to Yvonne.
No. Is that the end of yours, Rekha?
Iftikhar's is the last one, yes.
May I say, that's quite embarrassing, but I have to say that I have to pay tribute to a friend, a colleague of mine who is actually with us from France tonight, in France tonight, and pay tribute to my esteemed colleague, Jane Straker, who is a tireless trainer of interpreters at university level and at community level. And she will recognize some of the language that she introduced me to about snippets, customized note-taking. I owe most of what I have learned about interpreting from her. So thank you, Jane.
I'd just like to add that I got all of this really at the last minute from my friends and colleagues, and I didn't have to pay them a penny. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time and your patience. I deliberately sort of skipped over and wanted you to read the testimony. Mine basically encompasses what Sonia, Mika, Paul, and Iftikhar have said. And I wanted to leave time for all of you to ask questions, because I know in such events there's never enough time for questions and answers.
I can testify that it was very much last-minute testimonials, because I had 4 different versions of the slides this afternoon from Rekha. So we now have time for questions for both our speakers tonight. I mean, Yvonne went very quickly through lots of materials, so you may have questions you'd like to ask, some precisions. So if you have any question, please feel free. We've got about 25 minutes for questions, so this is your turn.
This is where it all goes quiet.
I think everyone's still reading Iftikhar's message, and I know he knows I've kind of snippet it a little bit.
And of course, I have to add something. This is in the days of, not in the days of online courses. This was a face-to-face course. So I have to make that clear.
That's correct. I think Sue's got her hand up. Sue Leshen.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Yvonne. Hi, Rekha. Emmanuel, bonsoir. And thank you very much for the session. It's very interesting, and obviously your course has attracted a lot of praise, Yvonne, which it certainly sounds very comprehensive. One thing that worries me quite a lot about trainers out there, and I'm not including you obviously in it, Yvonne, is there seems to be so little control over who can train. There seems to be very little, I think the word I'm looking for here is regulation. Almost anybody can start training anybody. I'm not quite sure if there's a solution to that. Another issue that I'd like you to address, if you can, please, is the issue of what we might refer to as joined up training, and I'm not just talking about, say, spoken language interpreters and, say, police officers like you've referred to, or spoken language interpreters and nurses, but also spoken language interpreters and VSLs. I think there's so much duplicated training going on in the UK that, really we should all be sharing a lot more. And I think we could improve a lot of training if we can, get most of the major players together. So I'd be interested to know what you think about those 2 points.
Right. Well, those are very difficult subjects to approach, really. Yes. I think part of the problem, there's 2 parts to the problem, really, of anybody thinking that they can be a trainer. It all comes down to the fact that although for many, many years, interpreters have tried to set up their own profession and their own professional rules, but we all know that it is not so. It is not self-regulating as much. Well, it's not self-regulating. It's not self-regulating, and it doesn't have the characteristics of a profession like nursing or the General Medical Council or engineering, where you can't just call yourself a trainer like that. You have to be approved. You have to study to become a trainer. And I think both of your questions, the joined up training and the lack of regulation and control over the issue of who can be a trainer, is really down to the fact that although we would like interpreters to belong to a profession, a lot of them, in fact, most of them don't. It's a minority who do. And until that is controlled, and until the title of interpreter is protected by law, I think this is the problem. And I hope I've answered your question.
It is a difficult question to answer. I know. One thing that happens to me quite often is I get many of my mentees asking for recommendations. I think it's very hard for people perhaps wanting to do, for example, the DPSI in law or health, to know where to go to get trained.
Yes. What can I say? I mean, it all comes down to lack of regulation. There is some regulation, but it's not enough. And you shouldn't be able to call yourself an interpreter unless you are unless you are registered, and unless you are that title is protected in law, just like nurse or doctor. You can't call yourself a nurse or a doctor if you are not registered and you haven't been trained. What's the difference?
Yeah, we've got a question from Yvonne.
Yes, hello. Hello. Hi. Thank you for the presentation. It was very, very resourceful. I've got a question about the DPSI health in particular. I myself currently hold only level 3, really, but simple question. Because I mean, I've from the point of view of obtaining the DPSI qualification, what would you say? How would that benefit someone with well, who's not holding that qualification yet? I mean, I understand for the obviously the everything, but it's just in simple words, how would you say that would benefit someone with a lower qualification?
How would it benefit you to study for the DPSI health? Is that what you're saying, Yvonne?
That's pretty much, yes, that's pretty much it. I tried to put it in simple words, sorry, but it's really, really vast topic. But yes, in simple words, yes.
Well, it's a two-way thing, isn't it? Not only is it going to benefit you as an interpreter, but it's going to benefit your service users and your service providers. And if you have studied some of the items, the elements that I've mentioned today, you are inevitably going to be a better interpreter than if you don't study them. Because I don't think any of us realize, even now, people are discovering new things about interpreting all the time, especially in forensic linguistics and in pragmatics. And I don't think people realize that the complexity of interpreting, it is not about words, it's about meanings and social situations. And until we realize that, I think we're playing with fire. I don't know whether I have. It's expensive. It's hard.
Yes, that's the thing. And I myself, I spoke to someone from the NHS, and basically, well, level 6 is not really appreciated. They don't see a difference between any sort of qualification. That's why when I found out about it, I was really shocked. That's why I'm asking that question, because some people, especially some people just don't see a difference. That's why I'm asking that question, because I think it's really strange these days.
Okay, I think this is a decision that you have to make for yourself, never mind what other people say. And it's a decision that is based on your own conscience and integrity. And this is the way you have to approach it. But thank you for that question.
Yeah, I just have a little input on to what Yvonne asked. Although it should be in the same league, I will ask you the question. Would you rather be treated by a first-year medical student or a qualified doctor? I rest my case.
That is a really, really simple question to answer. I understand all that. It's just, yes, the only thing is that I just try to understand the point of view, your point of view.
That qualification, which takes you to another level from the current level that you're at. I couldn't hear properly because the connection line is quite bad.
Yeah,
it will doing the DPSI takes you to a whole other level in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience. And I mean, doing a course to study for the DPSI, you cannot, whether it's, of course, Yvonne no longer runs her course, but whoever you do it with, it should be along the basis of what Yvonne explained, the eight sort of, the various categories she mentioned in her part of the presentation. There is no contest in terms of the fact that you've got this qualification, you can join the National Register of Public Service Interpreters, and the two together will give any future employer, any future client, the confidence in knowing that you have this solid grounding. That's how I could put it to you, Yvonne, and to anyone else.
Thank you so much for your answers.
Thank you. We have a question from Mesbah.
Oh, hello, Griffin. Yes, actually, not a question, just a comment. Yes, first of all, yes, I did attend the Yvonne's course many years ago, and in fact, I think the three other extended family members passed the DPS with it through Yvonne's course as well. Yeah. Um, I think I'm not sure exactly about the year, but probably about 15, 16 years ago, Yvonne, you may remember, we attended a session in Central London, jointly organized by the Home Office and the Institute of Linguists in terms of how to enhance the DPSI, in terms of looking at the curriculum, etc. And we have not progressed, but rather regressed. And what I feel is that it is really important for us to really consolidate and make sure that the DPSI is attended by and delivered by trained, as you said, Yvonne, professionals, but also with very concrete outcomes. I mean, I think two sessions previously I mentioned about an interpreter who passed the DPSI by sitting as a private candidate in law, but didn't know what PACE or interview under caution is.
Yeah.
Yes. And because of that, I think that the DPSI curriculum needs to be really looked at, and the exam method. For example, I would advocate including in the exam itself extensive reflective materials to be supplied. For example, health professionals have to go through, or legal professionals as well, because that would prove their understanding of the subject matter, but also their standpoint in terms of ethics, morality, etc. At the moment, anybody who has got good grasp or fairly good grasp of the language can actually pass the DPSI, and that is very alarming.
Yeah, I agree. So, Mesby, really just, I'm sorry, Mesby, you just echoed what I've said, that whether you've got the DPSI or not, even if you pass the DPSI, you still got to train yourself. It's not enough. It's not enough. And if you do want it to, going back to the previous Yvonne, you were asking about the DPSI Health. Then if you can choose an online course from a university, then perhaps you would get more of these elements that I've mentioned in my talk today.
May I just comment on what Mesbah said? I agree with Mesbah, and in terms of people who might have done the course, and I don't know how they might have done it, because I don't know how many people do not follow a training course to sit the DPSI. But just this morning, I was sent a message where last week in a court, an interpreter did not know the meaning of the term cul-de-sac or post-acquittal. And she thought that the barrister advising the defendant, or he, I don't know if the interpreter was male or female, this interpreter thought that the barrister advising the defendant was the prosecutor. And this is somebody, I'm assuming, has a DPSI. So there you go.
Speaking of DPSI, we've got a question by Isabella in the chat asking the difference between DPSI and DCI.
Before that, we answer that. Rosalind has asked the question, which DPSI provider should I choose? And as Emmanuel said at the beginning, we cannot advise you on that. But anyway, the DPSI versus DCI. DPSI stands for Diploma in Public Service Interpreting, and DCI stands for Diploma in Community Interpreting. I don't know who runs or issues the DCI. The CIOL, the Chartered Institute of Linguists, provides the exams for the DPSI. So yeah. Oh, and sorry, I've just seen Emmanuel's reply that we won't be commenting on any course or recommending any. Thank you.
And as I said before, there is no difference between community interpreting and public service interpreting. It is the same.
What I would say is, and the attendees should be getting a copy maybe of this recording, you will have Yvonne's slides. Those are the things you should be looking for in any course if you want to do the DPSI, whichever of the three options, whether it's law, local government, or health. The elements are there, the essential elements are there for what is a good course. There are people interpreting in court who don't have any interpreting qualifications. Isabella, I have to agree with you, and it kind of goes against what the Ministry of Justice requires of any provider of interpreters in court. They are supposed to have a qualification. But as you rightly said, they don't necessarily have a qualification. But the case I mentioned earlier on about the person in court, what I deliberately did not mention, and I'm about to mention, is that she's supposed to be or he is supposed to be an award-winning interpreter. This is the message I received. So there you go. For me, doing the DPSI, and some of us were very lucky to do Yvonne's DPSI, and I was even luckier to do 2 different DPSIs with Yvonne. But whichever provider you choose, doing the training course is absolutely essential, in my opinion. There's no 2 ways about it.
I would add to that, Rekha, that self-training, training yourself, is absolutely vital, and to know what you have to do to train yourself, to bring yourself up to the level of being a discourse interpreter and not a semantic interpreter is there's a lot that you can do yourself at home without any help from anybody to train yourself to be a better interpreter. So do bear that in mind, and do read Sandra Hale's book, Community Interpreting.
And give all of you who maybe are not sure, you can do some training yourself today, tomorrow, whenever. When you're in your car, or even if you're listening to your iPod or iPad, or you got your AirPods in or whatever, listen to something on the radio, anything, even if it's a song, and try to do simultaneous interpreting. See how, wait a few seconds and start doing lagging and doing the simultaneous interpreting. You can start by repeating in English or whatever language the song is. And then once you've got a bit more confidence, start doing interpreting. So first you do it in the language of the piece you're listening to, and then you can, and then you can start doing it as a simultaneous interpreting exercise. You see how you do. That's a little free tip.
Natalie in the chat mentioned that she does practice with documentaries on YouTube, which is also a very good opportunity to practice.
Yes. If I could say something about YouTube, YouTube is the most wonderful invention for interpreters because it gives you an enormous range of speech styles which you can use for practice with both consecutive and simultaneous interpreting. So, it didn't exist 20 years ago. Now it's all of these technological aids are there, and they can be used by you at home to do things that you can do to help yourself, to train yourself. Glory of the YouTube is that you can stop it and start it, or while you're interpreting to practice with. So, couldn't recommend it more highly.
A request from Isabella in the chat. Do you have any books or resources that you could also recommend for training?
Well, I have already recommended 2. You start off with those. That would be absolutely amazing. You would learn an awful lot.
Okay, I'm quite conscious of time and we haven't got much left. So if there is any burning question, please speak now, be silent forever. Okay. I have.
Oh, somebody wants to ask a question. I can see a raised hand.
No, I just make a comment, please.
Hello? Yes, I just want to know if it's possible that they can write the books in the chat or send it through email, the resources, so we can get them, please.
Okay, will do. Sorry about that. Please go ahead with your question.
I just wanted to just make a comment, really. You know how people mentioning that, you're always learning, even if you've done your DPSI, it's ongoing learning all the time. What I found is that, I've been interpreting now for about 25 years, really, and on and off. But what I found is now that I'm a Punjabi interpreter, and I find that the generation now that I'm interpreting for has different dialects. They have different words for different things, and depending on which part of India they're from, words are different, terminology is different. So it's just, I think it just shows that interpreting, even if you've done your DPSI, you've done your training years ago, it is ongoing training and raising awareness and looking at cultural insight and cultural differences, because they do evolve over the years. I don't know if other people find that in other languages.
May I just say, is it Kurvinder, I think?
It's Sukhvinder.
Sorry. I couldn't see your name properly. This is something which researchers have talked about, actually, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember who. I have read about this, because especially when people move away from their country of origin, their language, knowledge, and level is stuck at the time they moved.
Yeah.
And then when people come more recently, they have other ways of, speaking, idioms, phrases, etc. So yes, listening to radio, and you can get access to radio around the world, or even use YouTube, as several people have commented. Yeah, I listen to the radio in my languages every day, so that I can keep abreast with changes in terms, even if it's just banal everyday speech. So yes, this is something that is very important. Thank you, Emmanuel. I see you at A630.
Yes, and there was GR Translating Services. I don't know what your real name is. You had a question? Sorry, you were interrupted.
Oh, no, it was just about the resources.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. If I could draw your attention to the link I put in the chat, it's a link to a little survey. Please spare a couple of minutes to fill that survey, because it helps us to gather evidence of the usefulness of this training. And our money for the Aston Interpreter Network will be running out in the autumn. So we're trying to get more funding to keep running those events, and maybe also some DPSI training if we strike gold. So please, positive comments that you may have, suggestions for future events, that would be really, really useful. So please spare the time to fill the form. That would be much appreciated. As I said at the start of the meeting, we won't have an event in August because many people will be away, but we will have a hybrid event on Aston University campus and online mid-September, and it will be a slightly longer event, but we will send information about this shortly. So thank you very much to Yvonne and Reka for their input tonight, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Have a nice summer. Bye.